we only have one ingredient. We have chocolate chips for our chocolate chip cookies. Trying to keep things simple. In order to make 10,400 batches of cookies, there's going to be some sort of amount of raw materials we need to purchase during January in order to meet those needs. So a purchase budget is going to be telling us about our raw materials purchases. And hopefully I got enough where you can write in there, trying to fit it all on one page. Mike and Stacy treats a desired raw materials ending inventory of 10% of next month's production needs. So again, not only are we going to try to produce enough to get started in the next month, we also want to have enough raw materials on hand to start production as soon as February 1st hits. You don't want to have to wait around and for the delivery trucks to come in with those chocolate chips before you start producing on February 1st. You want to go ahead and have some left over in January, so immediately when your workers walk in the door on February 1st, you can get them right to work. So we're going to want to have some raw materials on hand to get us started. So we're going to use quarter one, and you'll need April's production to do March, so we're probably just going to look at January and February. The standard requires, remember back when we were talking about variances and had those standards? Well, I took that same information here to build our budget. It was 1 bag of chocolate chips per batch of cookies, and a bag of chocolate chips cost us $4 per bag. All right, so to do a purchase budget, we need to figure out how many units for which we need for purchases are required. What that means that we start with how many were we producing in January. Well, our production budget tells us that we're going to be producing 10,400 batches of cookies. Well, if that's how much we're going to produce, we know we need to have enough chocolate chips on hand to produce 10,400 batches of chocolate chip cookies. Well, we also know we need to have enough on hand to get started with next month's production needs. So and some of this is going to depend on what your lead time is for the supplier to get you your supplies. So if it takes them 2 weeks to get you your supplies in, well, it'll probably be based on 2 weeks of next month's production you'd want to have in ending inventory. So that's kind of how you get that estimate. In our case, it's going to be 10% of next month's production needs. So if we're expecting to produce 11,400 batches of cookies in February, we want to have on hand enough bags of chocolate chips to satisfy those first few days. In our case, 10% of that total production. We want to have enough bags of chocolate chips to meet that need. So if our production for February is 11,400, we need to have on hand enough bags of chocolate chips, the 10% of the 11,400, or 1,140. We need to have enough bags of chocolate chips to be able to produce that many chocolate chip cookies, or batches of cookies, so that we can start production in February before that next round of raw materials inventory comes in. So that gives us a need of 11,540. So in this case, I got it mostly set up so all the numbers will come out to be whole anyway. On your Excel project, I have little rounding rules. Remember, you used round in Excel 2, so now you're going to be using it for actual meaning in Excel 3. So that you're not going to be trying to produce a fraction of a batch of cookies. You're going to be rounding up so you have the whole batch of cookies ready to go. So that's how much chocolate chips we need to have on hand during January. But again, we're going to have some chocolate chips already ready to go on January 1st. So we don't need to repurchase those. We've already purchased them back in December. So again, this 10% rule is going to help us figure out what our beginning inventory is. So 10% of the 10,400 that we're going to produce in January means that we'll have beginning inventory of chocolate chips of 1,040. So we need to purchase enough chocolate chips to meet production needs of 10,500. So we need to have enough chocolate chips on hand to produce 10,500 batches of cookies. So how many bags of chocolate chips do we need? Well, here, chocolate chip bag purchases. We want to make 10,500 finished units. The standard is 1 bag per batch of cookies. So it's going to be pretty simple. 10,500 times 1. We need to purchase 10,500 bags of chocolate chips. Standard says that a bag of chocolate chips is $4. So the total cost of the chocolate chip purchases in January $42,000. All right, so the purchase budget. Simply, how many chocolate chips do we need to meet our production needs? A little bit to get started on production next month. Already got the chocolate chips on hand to start January's production, so we don't need to rebuy them. Tells us how many finished units we need to have chocolate chips on hand for. Multiply that by our standard raw materials per unit. Multiply that then by the price for the raw materials. It gives us how much it's going to cost us for chocolate chips during January. Does that make sense? All right, let's try your best at February then. All right, our production budget says $11,400 for February. We need to have enough to get started in March. March's budget was $8,800, so we'll need to have 880 enough chocolate chips for 880 ending inventory finished goods. So it gives us total whole units of 12,280, in which we need chocolate chips for. But we already have enough, or we will already have enough chocolate chips on hand for 1,140 batches of cookies, because that was going to be our ending inventory amount for January. That's how much we'll have on hand for February. So that means we'll need to purchase enough chocolate chips to satisfy making 11,140 batches of cookies. Using our standard information, saying that it's 1 bag per unit, means that we need 11,140 bags of chocolate chips. At $4 per bag, means 44,560 dollars worth of chocolate chip purchases we need to make. Questions on that? Try to keep the boredom level down. Let's move on to the cash side. The March, you can go ahead and do on your own, and all that will be posted, so it gives you extra practice. Now, while we need to make sure during January that we order up and purchase 10,500 bags of chocolate chips and expect a cost of $42,000 on that, doesn't necessarily mean that's how much cash is going to go out the door during January. Again, especially on business-to-business transactions, you don't usually pay for the stuff up front. You usually get it in, you get the bill, and then you pay it. The whole role of the accounts payable department. So in our case, it's on the other side of your sheet. If you Mikey purchased all the chocolate chips on credit. Traditional business-to-business type situation. Now, Mikey pays 30% of the accounts payable within the month it occurs, and then the remaining 70% is paid the following month. Fairly straightforward. You make some purchases early in the month, and you go ahead and pay for them before the month ends. The bulk of the purchases, we have 30 days to pay them, so that we don't really pay them until the next month. So that means we need to figure out how is the cash going out the door. We understand, as far as the fact that we're going to order and get this many bags of chocolate chips, cash is going to, have its own schedule. So the cash side. Well, in January, we're going to purchase $42,000 worth of chocolate chips. All on credit, so we don't have to figure out the credit portion. But before January ends, we're going to pay 30% of that. So 42,000 times 30%. $12,600. So for those purchases made in January, cash will go out the door in the amount of $12,600. All $42,000 was made on credit. Before January ends, we expect to pay 30% of that. That doesn't mean that's definitely always going to be that way, but that's our for budgeting purposes. That's how we normally pay. What's also going to happen in January, we got to finish paying off December's accounts payable balance. So in December, we purchased $96,000 worth of chocolate chips. I think I just made that number up. So if our purchases are budgeted to be $96,000, that means in January, to finish paying off accounts payable, we're going to have to pay 70% of that. Pay 30% of it in December. We're left with 70%. So that means in January, $67,200 will be paid. To give us a total cash going out the door in January of $79,800. Got 30% from current month purchases, 70% from last month's purchases. That's how the cash goes out. Any questions on that? Okay. Let's try again in February. We'll expect cash going out the door related to our purchases. For the current month, $13,368. Cash will go out the door. Purchases related to last month of $29,400. Any questions on that? All right. So far, we had to figure out what our sales were. Figured out how the cash was coming in related to those sales. Figured out then what were our production needs in order to meet that sales forecast. Figured out how much raw materials we need to purchase to meet those production needs. And then how much cash was going to go out the door related to those purchases. So I know it seems a little boring, but yeah, all this stuff keeps building upon itself. The exciting part of budgeting is if you're really into fighting with people or negotiating with people, that's the exciting part. Doing the numbers themselves, that's exciting. All right, so we figured out how we're going to get the raw materials. Well, what about the other two pieces that make up cost of goods sold?